First, I want to check in with everyone. Specifically, does everyone have that sheet of paper in front of them?
I'm going to put it in the chat too, in case people don't.
Great idea. Love that. Great. Okay, so I think the way to play it out, well, first of all, I'll read the title and then I'm going to look for 3 readers. Yeah, that's great. So the name of what we're up to today is Present Exodus, ? Memory, religion, and liberation in Jewish and Black Christian thought. And so just a word before I ask one of you to read for us. Basically, what's intriguing to me is how modern and contemporary people talk about texts and make meaning of texts. And in some way, what we do at Fed is precisely that. I mean, obviously, we do many things, but among them, eating and being together. But another thing is we talk about texts. And so, how do we talk about texts? How do we make meaning of texts? And so, the Exodus is a pretty special text. At least it is for the 3 people we're going to be exploring today, and we're going to have the opportunity to kind of gauge how they engage with this Exodus, how they make meaning of Exodus. So with that, I'd like to jump in and read the text. Now, I'm wondering if I can have a volunteer for text number 1 by a guy named Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Sure. You want me to start?
I do.
Okay.
Who is that?
That is Mordecai.
Mordecai. Ah,
Okay.
yes, it's a blessing that you're reading.
So let's see. Present Exodus, memory, religion, and liberation in Jewish and Black Christian thought. A.J. Herschel, 1963.
Heschel, not Herschel.
Heschel, excuse me. At the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. Moses' words were, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a feast to me." While Pharaoh retorted, "Who is the Lord, that I should heed this voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro to cross certain university campuses.
I want to thank you for reading. And before we continue to the next text, I want to give the opportunity for folks to share from what Mark or Mordecai just read to us. What is striking to you? And also, what questions do you have about what you just heard, what we have on the page from Abraham Joshua Heschel?
I have a question, I guess. Who is he? To start with, I don't know who he is. I guess obviously he's speaking about, racial tensions in 1963, but who is he to be speaking about it?
Great question. And what was your name?
Kathy.
Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, great question. So who is this Heschel guy? But you also, in your question, is the question, who is he to be speaking about these issues? Really important. Does anyone else have a question or something that's striking to them?
I have a response to her question.
Before we get to response, I want to hear questions and what's striking to us.
Well, this is kind of not unrelated question, but was this do you know are you familiar with the school Heschel? Yeah, this was named after Abraham Joshua Heschel, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
So Asher, I know you had a thought. Folks can still share things that are striking or questions they have after this, but I want to offer that Abraham Joshua Heschel was a rabbi, theologian, activist, and philosopher. He lived between 1907 and 1974, if I'm not mistaken. But he walked in Selma with Martin Luther King Jr. And he and Martin Luther King Jr. were actually very close friends, which is actually kind of an amazing thing because Heschel was originally from Poland and lived in Europe for much of his early adult life, and then came to the United States and became active in the civil rights movement. So the fact of their friendship is fascinating. And here he is, as this rabbi from Europe, talking about the Black experience in America in terms of Exodus. So to answer my own question, I personally find this striking because it's surprising that this European Jewish thinker, rabbi guy would be speaking about Exodus in terms of the Black experience in 1963, which culturally speaking, from my vantage point, is a very long time ago. But I want to see if others have questions. And Kathy, again, thank you for that question, to helping us all be on the same page about Heschel. Questions and things that are striking to us from this text.
I think one question that comes up is, since he's talking about the African-American experience, is how is he transferring the conversation between Pharaoh and Moses to that time, right, to the 60s or to related decades, like away from that time in Egypt? Like basically, who's Pharaoh and Moses in his text is a question that I'm sitting with.
Great. So thank you, Julia. So this question of this transposition, I'm using these really big words, but basically like transposing, bringing these ideas from the Exodus and this model from the Exodus and using it to engage with what's happening today. So who are the characters from then? To give you a quick sense of that, my impression, and he speaks a little more about it later in the speech, religion and race. My impression is that he sees some folks around him as either pharaohs or slaves of Pharaoh in the way they're thinking about keeping things the way they are and allowing the system to remain as it is. And then I think he thinks of Martin Luther King Jr. as a kind of Moses figure, leading his people to liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, Julia, that's my impression on that. Thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
Pretty soon we're going to move to the next text, but first, does anyone else have a question or something that is striking from what you're seeing here?
I have an impression.
Go for it.
I love the way that this is framed in terms of Moses comes to Pharaoh, both of them having different kind of sets of assumptions. And, from what I know about pharaohs were sort of god kings. So Moses says, here is my set of assumptions, and this is what you need to do about it. And Pharaoh comes back and says, well, here are my set of assumptions, and I'm sticking to mine and rejecting yours. And I think it's really interesting that that power dynamic of two sets of assumptions, one sort of comes to the other and says, I have mine and need you to accept mine. The other says, no, I have mine and you need to accept mine. Does that make, am I making sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people, both in the Bible and folks around Heschel in his own day, are speaking past one another. And Kevin is asking why. How are they speaking past one another? What is going on that they seem to be in this conversation and they can't just like agree or at least understand one another? There seems to be this lack of understanding or this misunderstanding in the first place. I think that's a really important point. And you're sort of speaking of the importance of psychology and assumptions in that relationship. One of the things I want to note before we move on to the next text is something that Heschel says. He says the outcome of the meeting of that summit is not yet, it's still ongoing, which I find so interesting because for me anyway, unlike for Heschel personally, it's like, okay, there's the text and there it is, and I'm reading it and I read it and that's what it says. But Heschel is like basically animating the text and saying the text is alive. And I want to just note that for everyone, like Exodus is living, it's around us. The Bible isn't over. We like live in the Bible. You see what I'm saying there? Does that make sense, everyone?
I don't know why I don't know why you refer to the text as being a lie. It's not this is a lie.
Right, but here I want to, Mordechai, I want to call your attention to the following. That Heschel says, the outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm trying to understand this. It's a much more complicated thing than it reads. I can accept that he's saying the Exodus isn't over yet. For a lot, actually, it probably holds for everybody. Not only the Jews and the blacks, as they're now referred to, as opposed to Negroes. But that's not a lie. He's just saying it's not done yet. There's still an Exodus. But the question is, I guess, so what is the Exodus? Exodus from what?
Right, and I put your point in the chat here. Is Exodus quote unquote done or alive? And I don't want to get stuck on these. This is great conversation and great reflection. We're going to transition in a minute to the next one. But just this sense that a text can be alive and can be with us, that we can see ourselves in the text. Heschel sees himself in the text. He sees his contemporaries as part of the text.
I just realized something. I thought you said a lie, L-I-E. I didn't realize you said alive.
Oh, okay, good.
All
right, I'm glad we're on the same page to bring in what Kevin was saying from a minute ago. I'm glad we have the same, I think we're seeing eye to eye now. We're ready to go to text number 2. Can any volunteers?
I want to read.
Kirby, go for it.
Hi everybody. Martin Luther King Jr., 1968. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Thank you, Kirby. And I want to just note, for anyone who, I find the original rendition of Martin Luther King Jr. on this just very inspiring. So if anyone's interested to get access to that, I'm glad to send it along. It's just with amazing oratory and this whole thing is actually, he said this, I believe it was the night before he died. Martin Luther King Jr. made this particular speech. But we're gonna do the same thing as we just did. That is, I'm gonna ask you to share what strikes you. What questions do you have? This can be in general, or it can be in terms of how is he reading Exodus? How is he engaging with Exodus?
He says like the promised land, and like the first thing that struck me is like, yeah, like the promised land, and and you said this was like the day before he died. That's the context? If that's the context, I'm thinking that as we know, Joseph had like a dream of like what the 7 years to come. I know this is kind of a little off topic, but I just saw a relationship with it. He had, he saw 7 years of famine, and then he saw 7 years of you need food, so we have to like prepare now. And it's just interesting because this is the day before he died. He's like, I've seen everything, I'm on top. And I think when he says like, so I'm like, but I want you to know that I'm not worried, and that like I'm not scared of any man, I'm happy. Like maybe he had like a dream or like a premonition of that he knew he was gonna die the next day, and he's like, well, it's okay. Like it's okay. I've already been to the top. I've already done what I want to, and I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. So I just kind of made a connection off the top.
Cool. I appreciate your bringing in that notion of a dream. And of course, he's quite famous for having a dream. And bringing in Joseph is pretty relevant in that regard, because Joseph is also known for dreams.
Well, he's also.
What I wanted to say, though, is just that he's sort of thinking that a promised land is coming, and it's sort of offering this idea of hope. And that's a very powerful thing. So he's, as you were saying, he's glad about the role that he's been able to have, and also it also has hope for his people, because of course the Israelites, like Moses, didn't make it into the promised land, but the Israelites ultimately make it there, and he's using this text to kind of say, that hope is valuable and is necessary, and we are building a better future. We are going to get there together, which personally I find inspiring. I know someone else had a comment. Was it you, Hannah? I don't know who said what.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's directly channeling Moses in this. Obviously, Moses was. I guess this is more outside of the book of Shemot and more Bamidbar and Vayikra, but basically he's basically he's saying Moses went to the mountaintop as he did because he transcribed the Torah there, or so we believe, or at least the 10 Commandments, if not the rest of it as well, and brought that all down from the mountaintop. And that was where Moses literally, if he was writing down the entire Torah, wrote down the part where he died. So Moses knew what was going on, and he's making that point very, very, very directly, that he knows exactly. I don't think he's mincing his words, because the man never minced his words. It's very, very clear. Moses obviously, was punished for a different thing, for hitting the rock in the water, which I don't think Martin Luther King thought of himself as being punished the same way per se, but merely just, to say that he wasn't going to be the one to complete the task, just to begin it. And he took a lot of contentment from that, which is kind of the, Jewish manifest of Tikkun Olam as well, which is that it's not our job to, finish a task, but it's to do our part while we can.
Really appreciate you bringing that in. I was going to say that very thing on the basis of your point, Hannah. Beautiful. I want to take this moment to go to the final text. So can I get a reader?
I can read.
Go for it.
Can one really claim that Torah is not an inherently political document? This sacred scroll recounts the story of a band of slaves rising up. Is that not a political message? Sharon Brous.
This was written by a contemporary rabbi, Sharon Brous, just a few years ago. And so I'm going to ask the same question. What strikes you, and what questions do you have?
Josh, what strikes me is Moses as this political leader that rises up against oppression, and that's something that strikes me. That's something that I've heard before, and this quote that you brought tells me a lot about how Moses is this guy who's rising against oppression. So
I appreciate what you're saying, Mauricio, very much, but I'm wondering if you could say one more line. Specifically, I'm wondering, like, why is that striking to you? Do you have, like, maybe one more line on that? What strikes you about this? Oh, Moses was a political leader, so, like, do you have anything more?
I do, I do. Maybe it says, maybe it goes back to the first one, saying that if it's a political text, it's not a storytelling book, it's alive as well.
Fascinating. Really interesting. So what Mauricio is bringing is, you know, if we read a text as being political, then what is it gonna mandate for how we relate to our own lives, to our own Jewish identities or Jewish practices or communities at large? I appreciate your naming that, and I want to offer something that comes up for me. I might not often think of the text as political. To say that this is a political document and to see Moses as a political leader, it's a political revolutionary of sorts. It's a whole different way of looking at Moses. I'm used to looking at Moses as a prince who's chosen by God and he has to go and do the task. So seeing him as a leader of a band of slaves is just a whole different thing. It just makes me think of our text in a different way, personally, from the usual paradigm that I have for engaging with the text. I want to see if others, Deb, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's also related with what Mauricio was saying, that to me, it adds to some of the blurry lines and confusion I feel like so many of us feel about Judaism in general. Like, what is a religious leader doing being political? Is Judaism a political entity? Do we have, how do we relate to political entities related to, to the Jewish people? Are we political? Are we religious? Are we cultural? Are we food-based? Like, the answer is yes. Like, we're all those things, but it's like, where's the line and how do we orient ourselves around those lines?
Such a key issue. I mean, some people have said to someone like Sharon Brous, with respect, I don't see eye to eye with that perspective. There's a different take. And in fact, Rabbi Sharon Brous is responding to a sermon that someone else gives that sort of speaks about, we don't want politics in shul. So this is her response. I just want to note that. So what I want to note is, as Deb said, we have, maybe you could say, Shivim Panim Le Torah. We have 70 faces of Torah. There are a lot of different interpretations of authentic Jewish practice. And here we have one, which is more politically engaged, politically grounded, and there are others. Also, I want to note, Deb and I met in Israel, which of course we can think about politics and Judaism and Jewish identity in that regard too. It's a whole other dimension. But yeah, does anyone else have something on what strikes you or questions either about the last text or about any of the other texts or as a whole regarding Exodus before we send you out into small groups?
Yeah, I have one quick thing. So when I was reading the text, I don't necessarily see Moses as like this big, powerful, as strong. I feel like he is mentally that. I don't know if he's like physically that, because if we remember, he had a speech impediment where he would struggle with saying words, and he would need someone, I believe his brother Aaron, to usually like not exactly speak for him, but kind of like help him, speak. And if we also, he was also not really a political like leader. Like, he only really found out that he was like a leader necessarily from a talking burning bush. And when he, when God, told him, you are going to be the one responsible. I see, so much, potential in you. That's when he's like, okay, yeah, I'll give this a shot. I'll go up to Pharaoh, and say, let my people go. But the leadership quality kind of had to be not necessarily like forced, but kind of he wasn't really aware of all this leadership kind of power that he had before God told him.
So I want to note here we have another interpretation of Moses and his role in the story of the Exodus. I also want to note something else that's coming up from your point, which is, the current leader of our country, of the United States. I know that not everyone's in the United States right now, but has a speech impediment, Joseph Biden. And I sometimes think about that. The very understandings of who are our leaders and who can be our leaders and what a political revolutionary looks like. I'm not saying that, Biden is Bernie Sanders, but I don't know, Bernie Sanders, what a surprising, socialist or whatever. It's just a fascinating world we live in, where I think sometimes, at least for me, people surprise me that he's the one, that she's the one leading that. Amazing, strange. I'm always learning new things. I'm gonna send you out into small groups, but before I do, any final questions, thoughts that we want to bring into this space?
Yeah, I have one for the last quote. Where was, I hesitate to call it a debate, where was this dialogue taking place?
Great. So yeah, this dialogue was taking place in the pages of the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, which is like the weekly Jewish newspaper of Los Angeles, and it was between Sharon Brous and another Los Angeles rabbi.
Is it still going on between them or others?
I would say that they sort of agree to disagree at this point. That's my impression.
That's a political statement.
But these issues are still live with our community, I think, in a pretty powerful way. The idea of what is it? Two Jews, three opinions. I definitely think that in terms of the issue that Rabbi Sharon Brous is raising, that we definitely have that diversity of perspective today. And it's certainly interesting and exciting, and hopefully gives us strength, but I think sometimes it's a challenge. That's my take. But I want to make sure you guys have time to read the questions. So Deb, I'm going to actually turn it to you and sort of see how you want to take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Josh. That's amazing. I'm thinking a lot about like two Jews, three opinions. How are we going to be a political entity? But that's discussion for another day. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. I want to briefly introduce the leaders. We have Asher on the first room. Say hi, Asher. Okay. We have Kevin. Great. And we have Julia. Thank you, Julia. Okay, so you have the document with the questions, and if not, your table leader will orient you. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to talk about these things, and then we'll come back and do a quick debrief, but I am going to stop the recording.